It was a rare organizer brave enough to try to come on an employer's actual premises to do his dirty work. No one wanted a 2-year rap without parole for criminal trespass and interference with trade. The kid had been young, about the same age as Death Waits and the cast members, and had clearly been desperate to collect his bounty from SEIU. He'd gone hard, struggling and kicking, shouting slogans at the wide-eyed cast members and few guests who watched him go away. Having him taken away had given Sammy a sick feeling. They hadn't had one of those vultures on the premises in 3 years, and never on Sammy's turf. What next, what next? How much worse could it get? Hi, Sammy Hackelberg wasn't the head of the legal department, but he was as high up in the shadowy organization as Sammy ever hoped to meet. He was old and leathery, the way that natives to the Sunbelt could be. He loved to affect ice cream suits and had even been known to carry a cane. When he was in casual conversation, he talked normal like a Yankee newscaster. But the more serious he got, the deeper and thicker his drawl got. Sammy never once believed that this was accidental. Hackelberg was as premeditated as they came. "I was just about to come over and see you." Sammy lied. Whatever problem had brought Hackelberg down to his office, it would be better to seem as though he was already on top of it. "I expect you were." Came out when the drawl got that far into the swamps that quickly, disaster was on the horizon. Hackelberg let the phrase hang there. Sammy sweated. He was good at this game, but Hackelberg was better. Entertainment lawyers were like fucking vampires, evil embodied. He looked down at his desk. "Sammy, they coming back after us, they all comin' back after us. Those ride people. They did what we thought they'd do, incorporating into a single entity that we can sue once and kill for good, but then they did something else." "Do you know what they did?" Sammy nodded. "They countersuing. We knew they'd do that." "Right, we didn't expect they'd raise a war chest like the one they've pulled together. They have a business plan built around suing us for the next 15 years. Sammy, they practically ready to float an IPO. Have you seen this?" He handed Sammy a hard copy of a chic little investment newsletter that was so expensive to subscribe to that he'd suspected until now that it might just be a rumor. "How do you get rid of a billion?" The Codicell experiment recognized one fundamental truth: it's easy to turn 10,000 into 200,000, but much harder to turn 10 million into 200 million. Scaling an investment up to gigascale is so hard, it's nearly impossible. But a new paradigm in investment that's unfolding around us that might actually solve the problem. Venture-financed litigation. 20 or 30 million sunk into litigation can bankrupt a $20 billion firm. Transferring to the investors whatever assets remain after legal fees. It sounds crazy, and only time will tell whether it proves to be sustainable. But the founder of the strategy, Landon Kettlewell, has struck gold for his investors more than once witnessed the legendary rise and fall of Codicell, the entity that emerged from the merger of Kodak and Duracell. Investors in the first 2 rounds and the IPO on Codicell brought home 30x returns in 3 years. Of course, investors who stayed in too long came away with nothing. Meanwhile, Kettlewell's bid to take down Disney parks looks good. The legal analysis of the vexatious litigation and unfair competition charges have legal scholars arguing and adding up the zeros. Most damning is the number of former Disney Parks employees or cast members in the treacly dialect of the Magic Kingdom who've posted information about the company's long-term plan to sabotage Kettlewell's clients. Likewise fascinating is the question of whether the jury will be able to distinguish between Disney parks, whose corporate citizenship is actually pretty good, from Disney products, whose record has been tainted by a string of disastrous child labor, safety, and design flaws. Astute readers will be thinking of the flammable pajamas flap of last year, and CEO Robert Montague's memorable words. "Parents who can keep their kids away from matches have no business complaining about our irresponsibility." Punitive jury awards are a wild card in this kind of litigation, but given the trends in recent years, things look bad for Disney parks. Bottom line, should your portfolio include a litigation investment component? Yes, unequivocally. While risky and slow to mature, litigation investments promise a staggering return on investment not seen in decades. $1 million or $2 million carefully placed with the right litigation fund could pay off enough to make it all worthwhile. This is creative destruction at its finest. The old dinosaurs like Disney parks are like rich seams of locked-away capital begging to be liquidated and put to work at nimbler firms. How can you tell if you've got the right fund? Come back next week, when we'll have a Q&A with a litigation specialist at Credit Suisse. First Boston, there's litigation specialists at Credit Suisse. He was big, Hackleberg, though he often gave the impression of being smaller through his habitual slouch. But when he pulled himself up, it was like a string in the center of the top of his head was holding him erect, like he was hovering off the ground, like he was about to leap across the desk and go for your throat. His lower jaw rocked from side to side. They do now, Sammy. Every investment bank has one, including the one that the chairman of our board is a majority shareholder in. Sammy swallowed. But they've got just as deep pockets as we do. Can't we just fight these battles out and take the money off of them when we win, if we win? Sammy saw his opportunity to shift the blame. If we've been acting on good legal advice, why wouldn't we win? Hackleberg inhaled slowly, his chest filling and filling until his ice cream suit looked like it might pop. His jaw clicked from side to side. But he didn't say anything. Sammy tried to meet that cool gaze, but he didn't outstare the man. The silence stretched. Sammy got the message. This was not a problem that originated in the legal department. This was a problem that originated with him. He looked away. How do we solve this? We need to raise the cost of litigation. Samuel. The only reason this is viable is that it's cost-effective to sue us. When we raise the cost of litigation, we reduce its profitability. How do we raise the cost of litigation? You have a fertile imagination. Sammy. I have no doubt that you will be able to conceive of innumerable means of accomplishing this goal. I see, I hope you do. I really hope you do. Because we have an alternative to raising the cost of litigation. Yes, we could sacrifice an employee or two. Sammy picked up his water glass and discovered that it was empty. He turned away from his desk to refill it from his filter, and when he turned back, the lawyer had gone. His mouth was dry as cotton and his hands were shaking. Raise the cost of litigation. Huh. He grabbed his laptop. There were ways to establish anonymous email accounts, but he didn't know them. Figuring that out would take up the rest of the afternoon, he realized, as he called up a couple of FAQs. In the course of a career as varied and ambitious as Sammy's, it was often the case that you ran across an email address for someone you never planned on contacting, but you never knew, and a wise planner makes space for lots of outlier contingencies. Sammy hadn't written down these email addresses. He decommitted them to memory. Death Waits was living the dream. He took people's money and directed them to the ride's entrance, making them feel welcome. Talking ride trivia. Some of his pals spotted him at the desk and enviously demanded to know how he came to be sitting on the other side of the wicket, and he told them the incredible story of the Fatkins who simply handed over the reins. This was how you ran a ride. None of that artificial gloopy sweetness that defined the Disney experience. Instead, you got a personal, informal, human-scale experience. Chat people up, find out their hopes and dreams, make admiring noises at the artifacts they brought to add to the ride, kibitz about where they might place them. Around him, the bark of the vendors. One of them, an old lady in a blinding white sundress, came by to ask him if he wanted anything from the coffee cart. There had been a time. Those first days when they rebuilt Fantasyland, when he really felt like he was part of the magic. No. The magic, with capital letters. Something about the shared experience of going to a place with people and having an experience with them, that was special. It must be why people went to church. Not that Disney had been a religion for him. Exactly. But when he watched the park he'd grown up attending take on the trappings that adorned his favorite clubs, his favorite movies and games, man, it had been a piece of magic. And to be a part of it. To be an altar boy, if not a priest, in that magical cathedral they all built together in Orlando. But it hadn't been real. He could see that now. At Disney. Death Waits had been a customer, and then an employee, cast member. He corrected himself reflexively. What he wanted, though, was to be a citizen. A citizen of the magic which wasn't a magic kingdom, since kingdoms didn't have citizens, they had subjects. He started to worry about whether he was going to get a lunch break by about 2, and by 3 he was starving. Luckily that's when Lester came back. He thanked Death profusely, which was nice, but he didn't ask Death to come back the next day. When can I come back and do this some more? You want to do this? I told you that this morning. I love it. I am good at it. 2. Lester appeared to think it over. I don't know, man. I kind of put you in the hot seat today, but I don't really have the authority to do it. I could get into trouble. Death waved him off. Don't sweat it. Then, he said with as much chirp as he could muster, which was precious fucking little. He felt like his heart was breaking. It was worse than when he finally asked out a coworker who worked the Pinocchio Village house, and she had her looked so horrified that he made a joke out of it, worried about a sexual harassment complaint. Lester clearly caught some of that, for he thought some more and then waved his hands. Screw her anyway. Meet me here at 10 tomorrow. You re-in. Death wasn't sure he heard him right. You re-kidding? No man, you want it, you got it. You re-good at it, like you said. Holy thanks. Thank you so much. I mean it. Thank you. He made himself stop blithering. Nice to meet you, he said finally. Have a great evening. Youch. He was speaking cast members. Nice one. Darren. He saved enough out of his wages from his first year at Disney to buy a little Shell electric two-seater, and then he gone way into debt buying kits to mod it to look like a Big Daddy Roth coffin dragster. The car sat alone at the edge of the lot. Around him, a slow procession of stall operators, with their arms full, headed for the freeway and across to the shantytown. Meanwhile, he nursed his embarrassment and tried to take comfort in the attention that his gleaming, modded car evinced. He loved the decorative spoilers. The huge rear tires, the shining muffler pipes running alongside the bulging running boards. He stepped in and gripped the bat-shaped gearshift, adjusted the headstone-shaped headrest, and got rolling. It was a long drive back home to Melbourne, and he was reeling from the day's events. He wished he'd gotten someone to snap a pic of him at the counter. Shit. He pulled off at a filling station after a couple hours. He needed a piss and something with guarana if he was going to make it the rest of the way home. It was all shut down, but the automat was still open. He stood before the giant wall-sized glassed-in refrigerator and dithered over the energy drinks. There were chocolate ones, salty ones, colas and cream sodas, but a friend had texted him a picture of a semi-legal yogurt smoothie with taurine and modafinil that sounded really good. He spotted it and reached to tap on the glass and order it just as the fat guy came up beside him. Fat guys were rare in the era of fatkins. It was practically a fashion statement to be chunky, but this guy wasn't fashionable. He had onion breath that Death could smell even before he opened his mouth, and he was wearing a greasy windbreaker and baggy jeans. He had a comb over and needed a shave. What the hell are you supposed to be? I am not anything. Death Waits said. He was used to shit kickers and tourists gawping at his shock of black hair with its viridian green highlights, his white face paint and eyeliner, his contact lenses that made his whole eyes into zombie white cue balls. You just had to ignore them. You don't look like nothing to me. You look like something. Something you'd dress up a 6-year-old as for Halloween. I mean, what the fuck? He was talking quietly and without rancor, but he had a vibe like a basher. He must have arrived at the deserted rest stop while Death Waits was having a piss. Death Waits looked around for a security cam. These rest stops always had a license plate cam at the entrance and a couple of anti-stick-up cams around the cashier. He spotted the camera. Someone had hung a baseball hat over its lens. He felt his balls draw up toward his abdomen and his breathing quicken. This guy was going to fucking mug him. Shit. Maybe take his car. Okay, Death said. Nice talking to you. He tried to step around the guy, but he sidestepped to block Death's path, then put a hand on Death's shoulder. It was strong. Death had been mugged once before, but the guy hadn't touched him. He'd just told him, fast and mean, to hand over his wallet and phone and then had split. I am not done. The guy said. Look, take my wallet. I don't want any trouble. Apart from 2 glorious sucker punches at Sammy. Death had never thrown a punch. Not since he'd flunked out of karate lessons at the local strip mall when he was 12. He liked to dance and he could run a couple miles without getting winded, but he'd seen enough real fights to know that it was better to get away than to try to strike out if you didn't know what you were doing. You don't want any trouble. Huh, Death held out his wallet. He could cancel the cards. Losing the cash would hurt now that he didn't have a day job, but it was better than losing his teeth. The guy smiled. His onion breath was terrible. I want trouble. Without any preamble or wind-up, the guy took hold of the earring that Death wore in his tragus, the little knob of cartilage on the inside of his ear, and briskly tore it out of Death's head. It was so sudden, the pain didn't come at once. What came first was a numb feeling, the blood draining out of his cheeks and the color draining out of the world, and his brain double and triple checking what had just happened. Did someone just tear a piece out of my ear? Tear. Ear. Then the pain roared in, all of his senses leaping to keen awareness before maxing out completely. He heard a crashing sound like the surf, smelled something burning, a light appeared before his eyes, an acrid taste flooded his mouth and his ear felt like there was a hot coal nestled in it, charring the flesh. With pain came the plan, get the fuck out of there. He took a step back and turned to run, but there was something tangled in his feet. The guy had bridged the distance between them quickly, very quickly, and had hooked a foot around his ankle. He was going to fall over. He landed in a runner's crouch and tried to start running, but a boot caught him in the butt, like an old-timey comedy moment, and he went sprawling, his chin smacking into the pavement, his teeth clacking together with a sound that echoed in his head. Get the fuck up, the guy said. He was panting a little, sounding excited. That sound was the scariest thing so far. This guy wanted to kill him. He could hear that. He was some kind of truck stop murderer. Death's fingers were encrusted in heavy silver rings, stylized skulls, a staring eyeball, a coffin-shaped poisoner's ring that he sometimes kept artificial sweetener in, an ankh, an alien head with insectal eyes, and he balled his hands into fists. Thinking of everything he'd ever read about throwing a punch without breaking your knuckles. Get close. Keep your fist tight, thumb outside. Don't wind up or he'll see it coming. He slowly turned over. The guy's eyes were in shadow. His belly heaved with each excited pant. From this angle, Death could see the guy had a gigantic boner. The thought of what that might bode sent him into overdrive. He couldn't afford to let this guy beat him up. He backed up to the rail that lined the walkway and pulled himself upright. He cowered in on himself as much as he could, hoping that the guy would close with him, so he could get in one good punch. He muttered indistinctly, softly, hoping to make the man lean in. His ring-encrusted hands gripped the railings. The guy took a step toward him. His lips were wet, his eyes shone. He had a hand in his pocket and Death realized that getting his attacker close in wouldn't be smart if he had a knife. The hand came out. It was pudgy and stub-fingered, and the fingernails were all gnawed down to the quick. Death looked at it. Spray can. Pepper spray. Mace. He didn't wait to find out. He launched himself off the railing at the fat man, going for his wet, whistling cave of a mouth. The man nodded as he came for him and let him paste one on him. Death's rings drew blood on the fat cheek and rocked the guy's head back a bit. The man stepped back and armed away the blood with his sleeve. Death was running for his car, hand digging into his pocket for his phone. He managed to get the phone out and his hand on the door handle before the fat man caught up, breathing heavily, air whistling through his nose. He punched Death in the mouth in a vastly superior rendition of Death's soul brave blow, a punch so hard Death's neck made a crackling sound as his head rocked away, slamming off the car's frame, ringing like a gong. Death began to slide down the car's door, and only managed to turn his face slightly when the man sprayed him with his little aerosol can. Mace. Death's breath stopped in his lungs and his face felt as if he deplunged it into boiling oil. His eyes felt worse, like dirty fingers were sandpapering over his eyeballs. He choked and fell over and heard the man laugh. Then a boot caught him in the stomach and while he was doubled over. It came down again on his skinny shin. The sound of the bone breaking was loud enough to be heard over the roaring of the blood in his ears. He managed to suck in a lungful of air and scream it out, and the boot connected with his mouth, kicking him hard and making him bite his tongue. Blood filled his mouth. A rough hand seized him by the hair and the rasping breath was in his ears. You should just shut the fuck up about Disney on the fucking internet, you know that. Kid. The man slammed his head against the pavement. Just. Shut. The fuck. Up, bang, bang. Bang. Death thought he'd lose consciousness soon. He had no idea that pain could be this intense. But he didn't lose consciousness for a long, long time. And the pain could be a lot more intense, as it turned out. Sammy didn't want the writer meeting him at his office. His organization had lots of people who'd been loyal to the old Gothy Park and even to death weights. They plotted against him. They wrote about him on the fucking internet, reporting on what he'd eaten for lunch and who shouted at him in his office and how the numbers were declining and how none of the design crews wanted to work on his new rides. The writer Cool didn't come to the office. Cool didn't come within miles of the park. In fact, if Sammy had had his way, they would have done this all by phone, but when he emailed the writer, he said that he was in Florida already and would be happy to come and meet up. Of course he was in Florida, he was covering the ride. The trick was to find a place where no one from work would go. That meant going as touristy as possible, something overpriced and kitschy. Camelot was just the place. It had once been a demolition derby stadium, and then had done turns as a skate park, a dance club and a discount wicker furniture outlet. Now it was Orlando's #2 Arthurian-themed dining experience, catering to package holiday consolidators who needed somewhere to fill the gullets of their busloads of tourists. Watching men in armor joust at low speed on glue factory nags took care of an evening's worth of entertainment. 2. Sammy parked between two giant air-conditioned tour coaches, then made his way to the entrance. He told the guy what he looked like, and the guy had responded with an obvious publicity shot that made him look like Puck from a boys' school performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Unruly hair, mischievous grin. When he turned up, though, he was 10 years older, a cigarette jammed in the yellowing crooked stumps of his teeth. He needed a shower and there was egg on the front of his denim jacket. "I am Sammy," Sammy said. "You must be Freddie." Freddie spat the cigarette to one side and shook with him. The writer's palms were clammy and wet. "Pleasure to meet you," Freddie said. "Camelot, taste of home for you. I expect," Sammy said. "Tally-ho. Pip pip." Freddie scrunched his face up in an elaborate sneer. "You are joking." "Right, I am joking. If I wanted to give you a taste of home, I'd have invited you to the Rose and Crown pub in Epcot. Have a jolly good time at the Rose and Crown." Still joking. "I trust, still joking," Sammy said. "This place does a decent roast beef, and it's private enough." Private in the sense of full of screaming stupid tourists stuffing their faces, exactly. Sammy took a step toward the automatic doors. "Before we go in, though," Freddie said. "Before we go in, why are you talking to me at all?" Mr. Disney Parks executive. He was ready for this one. "I figured that sooner or later you'd want to know more about this end of the story that you've been covering. I figured it was in my employer's best interest to see to it that you got my version." The reporter's grin was wet and mean. "I thought it was something like that. You understand that I am going to write this the way I see it. Not the way you spin it. Right?" Sammy put a hand on his heart. "Of course. I never would have asked anything less of you." The reporter nodded and stepped inside the air-conditioned, horsey-smelling depths of Camelot. The greeter had acne and a pair of tights that showed off his skinny knock-knees. He took off his great peaked cap with its long plume and made a stiff little bow. "Greetings, milords, to Camelot. Yon feast awaits, and our brave knights stand ready to do battle for their honor and your amusement." Freddie rolled his eyes at Sammy, but Sammy made a little scooting gesture and handed the greeter their tickets, which were ringside. If he was going to go to a place like Camelot, he could at least get the best seats in the house. They settled in and let the serving wench, whose fancy contact lenses, piercings, and electric blue ponytails were seriously off-theme, take their roast beef orders and serve them gigantic pewter tankards of ale. Bud Light, and the logo was stamped into the sides of the tankards. "Tell me your story, then," Freddie said. The tourists around them were noisy and already a little drunk, their conversation loud to be heard over the looping soundtrack of Ren Fair polka music. "Well, I don't know how much you know about the new Disney Parks organization. A lot of people think of us as being just another subsidiary of the Mouse, like back in the old days. But since the IPO, we our own company. We license some trademarks from Disney and operate rides based on them, but we also aggressively license from other parties: Warner's, Universal, Nintendo, even the French comic book publisher responsible for Asterix. That means that we get a lot of people coming in and out of the organization, contractors or consultants working on designing a single ride or show. That creates a lot of opportunities for corporate espionage. Knowing what properties we reconsidering licensing gives the competition a chance to get there ahead of us, to land an exclusive deal that sets us back on square one. It's ugly stuff. They call it competitive intelligence, but it's just spying, plain old spying. All of our employees have been contacted, one time or another, by someone with an offer: get me a uniform, or a pic of the design roughs, or a recording of the soundtrack, or a copy of the contracts, and I'll make it worth your while. From street sweepers to senior execs. The money is just sitting there, waiting for us to pick it up. The wench brought them their gigantic pewter plates of roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, parsnips, and a mountain of French fries, presumably to appease the middle American appetites of the more unadventurous diners. Freddie sliced off a throat-plugging lump of beef and skewered it on his fork. You going to tell me that the temptation overwhelmed one of your employees? Yes. He shoved the entire lump into his mouth and began to masticate it, cheeks pouched out, looking like a kid with a mouthful of bubble gum. Precisely. Our competitors don't want to compete with us on a level playing field. They are, more than anything, imitators. They take the stuff that we carefully build, based on extensive research, design and testing, and they clone it for parking lot amusement rides. There's no attention to detail. There's no attention to safety. It's all cowboys and gypsies. Freddie kept chewing, but he dug in the pockets of his sports coat and came up with a small stubby notebook and a ballpoint. He jotted some notes, shielding the pad with his body. And these crass imitators enter into our story how? Freddie asked around his beef. You know about these new work people, they call themselves remixers, but that's just a smokescreen. They like to cloak themselves in some postmodern Creative Commons legitimacy, but when it comes down to it, they made their fortune off the intellectual property of others, uncompensated use of designs and technologies that others had invested in and created. So when they made a ride, it wasn't much of much. Like some kind of dusty commie museum, old trophies from their last campaign. But somewhere along the way, they hooked up with one of these brokers who specializes in sneaking our secrets out of the park and into the hands of our competitors, and quick as that, they were profitable, nationally franchised. He stopped to quaff his Bud Light and surreptitiously checked out the journalist to see how much of this he was buying. Impossible to say. He was still masticating a cheekful of rare roast, juice overflowing the corners of his mouth. But his hand moved over his pad and he made an impatient go-on gesture with his head, swallowing some of his payload. We fired some of the people responsible for the breaches, but there will be more. With 50,000 cast members, the writer snorted a laugh at the Disney speak and choked a little, washing down the last of his mouthful with a chug of beer. 50,000 employees, it's inevitable that they'll find more. These ex-employees, meanwhile, have moved to the last refuge of the scoundrel. Internet message boards, petulant tweets, and whiny blogs, where they busily running us down. We can win, but at least we can staunch the bleeding. That's why we've brought our lawsuits, and why we'll bring the next round. The journalist's hand moved some more, then he turned a fresh page. I see. Yes, all fascinating. Really. But what about these countersuits, more posturing? Pirates love to put on aggrieved airs. These guys ripped us off and got caught at it, and now they want to sue us for their trouble. You know how countersuits work. They just a bid to get a fast settlement. Well, I did something bad, but so did you, why don't we shake hands and call it a day? Aha. So you telling me that these intellectual property pirates made a fortune knocking off your rides and that they only counter-suing you to get a settlement out of you? That's it in a nutshell. I wanted to sit down with you, on background, and just give you our side of things, the story you get from the press releases. I know you're the only one trying to really get at the story behind the story with these people. Freddie had finished his entire roast and was working his way through the fries and limp Yorkshire pudding. He waved vigorously at their serving wench and hollered, "More here, love," and quaffed his beer. Sammy dug into his cold dinner and speared up a forkful, waiting for Freddie to finish swallowing. Well, that's a very neat little story. Mr. Disney executive off the record on background. Sammy felt a vivid twinge of anxiety. Freddie's eyes glittered in the torchlight. Very neat indeed. Let me tell you one of my own. When I was a young man, before I took up the pen, I worked a series of completely rubbish jobs. I cleaned toilets.